Well, it looks like we are finally live and with a good stream, a good connection. Excellent connectivity, as some might say. Just waiting to see word from the chat screen that the stream is up and running. All my indications say that it is, but I've only done this 1.5 times, so we'll see. Let me know. Can I get a word? All right, sounds good, he says. That's good to hear. All right, we are live with the live stream. I don't know exactly how long we'll go with this, but we'll monkey around as long as everybody's having a good time and asking questions and bringing interesting things to the front. I almost had, even though my signal was dog crap today back at the homestead, I did almost have the telephone hookup figured out. So I'm getting closer on a lot of these little details that I'm working on to make the live stream experience hopefully more entertaining, but a lot more interactive. So no lag, that's what I'm seeing. It shouldn't be any lag. I'm sitting in my truck in town, just outside of the best Wi-Fi on the island. So if I wasn't going to get a good signal here, then nobody's got a good signal. So at least I can see that my previous issues were definitely with the signal. You see a little number on a app telling you what your signal strength is. Sure, I tend to believe it, but at the same time, when you're not sure where exactly your point of failure is, when there's 12 potential points of failure, it's nice to know that you can eliminate 5 or 6 or 7 of those points and then eventually get up running, be a little more smooth. So what do we have here? Is my voice? Yeah, this mic might be worse. It's a fairly expensive mic, but it's a Bluetooth mic. Not what I'll be using moving forward, but trying to do this damn thing with my computer and an iPad and a portable power supply in my car. I couldn't also hook up the audio system that I will be running normally. So yeah, where are we at? It is fight week, absolutely, and the card for 249 is great. One of the things I would like to get into is just how good, at least on paper, is this card. A lot of people are talking about it being the best card ever. I usually go back to UFC 205, and that's the one with the 3 big, basically co-main events, the championship events. Conor versus Alvarez, Woodley versus Wonder Boy, and Namajunas. No, Joanna versus Karolina Kowalkiewicz. And then the following year was also another 3 co-main events at MSG. What was that, 217? I can't remember. And that one was pretty good, but we'll go fight by fight through both of those cards, and I'd like to see what some of you think is some of your favorite cards of all time, or at least on paper, ones you were excited for. I think obviously part of the excitement is coming from we haven't had a goddamn event in a long time. In fact, it feels like the last event was almost that strange fight with a very shallow card between McGregor and Cowboy. I know we had Jon Jones fight since then, and we had Israel uh, Israel fight Romero, but certainly the Izzy Romero fight had so many shenanigans, and it's very interesting to talk about. And I'm definitely going to put out at least one episode on that fight at some point, because while the fight itself lacked mm, action, but it lacked a lot of things. It in the build up in and the follow through, it didn't lack in sort of the mental aspect. That fight was all mental and bled over on both sides of the fight before and after trying to win the narrative battle. If Romero had a little better moxie with his use of English, I think he could have positioned himself a lot better coming out of that fight. You know, if he had Khabib's ability to speak, not flowery English, but to speak well enough to nail home the narrative, I think you have a very different point coming out, a very different perspective coming out of the UFC 248. Is that what it was? So we'll get to that at another time. So I'm going to run through some of the questions and comments from you guys. Newt is the Brendan Schaub of MMA videos. I'm going to take that as a compliment because the guy's had success. And I would like to have a conversation with Brendan, quite honestly. Uh, he's an interesting character. If you just listen to his words and you don't give him any benefit of the doubt, the guy can stick his foot in his mouth with both feet repeatedly. But I think there's more to him. I think there's a lot of. He's definitely trying to. I think he's trying to measure up to the people around him. He's sort of the ultimate sidekick in a way, but he's blossomed. His career, at least, has blossomed out of that, where he's got some of his own things going on, which good for him. Good for him. So, is Gaethje the Brendan Schaub of MMA videos? I don't know. Can't bear to see Tony Streak go up in smoke on Saturday. The highlight is extremely dangerous. Yeah, that's the only sour note to me for this whole event is Gaethje versus Ferguson. It's completely unnecessary. If Ferguson wins, it doesn't say anything more about Ferguson than what we already knew. And quite honestly, should Ferguson lose, anybody could lose to Gaethje. Anybody can lose to Ferguson. If you get in the cage often enough, you're going to lose fights. And the same was true and was standard in boxing during boxing's different golden eras. I think about what they call them, the four horsemen of the, or the fairly lightweight, middleweights, but Hearns and Hagler and Leonard and No Moss. Can't remember his name right now. Sorry. Uh, those guys all fought. They all fought each other. They fought multiple great fighters at that time. They all took their wins and they took their losses. And outside of having a dominant heavyweight American champion, that's the healthiest period of boxing. And I think after you had Darth of charismatic, interesting fighters that had to be seen, you had Roy Jones Jr., and he completely dominated his era of boxing. but he didn't have quite the personality that drew people in. And as many people have pointed out, he didn't have a rival. Nobody rivaled him, and he couldn't pretend that his opponents were anywhere close to him. He couldn't compare. You take a guy like Tony Ferguson, and half of his fights, it looks like he's losing right up to the second that he wins. And a lot of times, this was true for me. I had to go back, especially his first 6 or 8 fights on this recent streak of his, 12-fight streak. I had to go back and see, okay, what was going on. And a lot of times, Ferguson was doing what he wanted to do, but part of that was allowing his opponent the position that they wanted. But he also would get cracked a few times and then do the crazy somersaults and get the hell out of there, and it works for him. But it looks very much like he could lose any of those fights. I think the majority of the community still thinks Kevin Lee had a shot at winning that first fight, like he was winning at some point. Kevin Lee was never winning that fight. You go back to the end of the first round when Lee's on top, you have Joe Rogan going crazy talking about, Lee's about to finish Ferguson. Watch Ferguson's body language. First of all, the punches aren't landing clean. And Tony has him just enough off balance by rocking his hips that Lee can never get steam on any of the punches, even the ones that do land. And as soon as they're separated, you can see which guy's tired and which guy's, ready to go. And then ultimately, Tony wins basically from the bottom in the next round or early in the third round. So Ferguson's a guy who looks like he could lose any fight. Even Khabib, who's been extremely dominant over all his fights, it's very easy to imagine what a Khabib loss would look like, and that's a guy who could shuck the takedown in the first round. Of course, there's other ways to win, and we imagine that Ferguson brings a skill set that would allow him to win without stopping the takedown. Khabib's never had to deal with elbows and plethora of submissions from the bottom from a guy like Ferguson, or maybe Ferguson just takes the top. We saw Conor McGregor almost got the top position in the first round against Khabib. In fact, there was the first couple grappling moves, Conor won those. Now, it was probably stupid of Conor to try to do those things, even though he won a couple. He was just getting deeper into the waters where Khabib actually lives. So while he did get a couple good positions on Khabib while they were away from the fence, ultimately you let Khabib hang out around your legs and you're just an average grappler. For MMA, like McGregor is, you're going to be taken down. So I guess the point I was starting with was we're in an era where great fighters are not necessarily fighting all the greatest fighters they should be facing. And my biggest problem with Ferguson against Gaethje, it's not the fight or the matchup itself, because how would it get any better than those two maniacs going in there? It'll be pure violence and pure mayhem, just absolute video game stuff. But both of those guys should be the next opponent for Khabib. Khabib should have to face both of those guys. There's no reason to cut the line for McGregor, and that's part of what's going on here. Is the UFC is going along with Khabib's desire to fight about once every 18 months or 16 months. I can't remember. If you look out how long he's been in the UFC, he doesn't average even one fight a year. And he's been very careful, and that was the analogy I was eventually going to come around to, that he is very much like a Floyd Mayweather. Other than I don't think Floyd had near the top competition to face that Khabib does. But Khabib is, whether, some people are starting to think that Khabib, is afraid to fight Ferguson. And as I talked about in the last live stream, that isn't my belief, but I understand that there is a pattern starting to come through. As many times as Khabib has found a way, and maybe it's just pure coincidence, but it starts to look a certain way. And it's at the point where Khabib has pulled out 3 times against Ferguson, he pulled out 3 or 4 times against Cowboy, that the UFC's job is to stand in there and hold his feet to the fire. That's the problem the UFC has, though, right now, and not just because of the coronavirus. Previous to everything going sideways with the pandemic, the UFC was not putting on all the best fights it could. It was there were matchups like Cejudo was going to face Jose Aldo, and you had, Adesanya got to the championship against Whitaker before Paulo Costa, but Paulo Costa had been fighting tougher guys and looking better throughout his career. Now I understand that that's more of a either or situation. Um, who's better, Adesanya or Paulo Costa? I think it's fine for the UFC to say, okay, we think Adesanya's the best, so we're going to fast track him. It also doesn't hurt that he's got a lot more components to be a true superstar. I think Paulo Costa could be an extremely big superstar for the UFC. Maybe not globally in the same way that Adesanya is, but if you think about the Brazilian base that the UFC has always tried to cultivate, Costa could actually make more money for the UFC over time, because he could also be a much more dominant champion than what Adesanya is likely to be. The fight against Romero isn't a fluke. That was one of the 2 or 3 predictable outcomes of that fight, of how it would go. So, all right, let's get to some questions. People are saying good audio. That's good. Pullkit says, please upload videos if you can. I can't watch live streams at 3 a.m. different time zone, and really need your content in my life. Please, good sir. Yes, one of the things I am absolutely doing is building a schedule and a set of habits so that I can put out new episodes. It's something, in fact, I want to talk with you guys about. We're sitting at the beginning of fight week, and I know that I can put out 2, maybe 3 episodes during this time period, and I'd like to know, what should I be covering? What's most interesting to you? That's a difficult thing for me to understand sometimes, is what's interesting to you. And I know everybody's going to have a little bit different idea. And this week will be a little bit strange, because typically I like to pick up some of the one-on-one interviews you get during fight week, or maybe even the scrum back at 229. I thought the most interesting thing going on with the media was Tony Ferguson's scrum, and I did an episode on that. So I'll definitely be doing episodes this week. I also want to get into an absolute schedule of doing these live streams. Eventually, I'm going to build a little office on my property and put it in a spot where I can get a signal so that I can work from home and then use all my proper equipment. But I want to be doing live streams. It was your idea, in fact, from suggestions um, from I hate calling you guys fans, but fans suggesting that I do Sunday live stream, and I like that. And it'll be earlier. I'll start going at 11 a.m. on Sundays, and maybe even get a little earlier. We'll work with the time because I know there are people in Central or even Eastern Europe and the Middle East and Africa who have all contacted me and said, Jesus, it's the middle of the night for me, basically, when you're doing live streams. So I'd like to make everybody as welcome as possible with that. So I like the idea of the Sunday live stream. I'm also going to do like an hour just chat or I don't want to call it a recap, but I'll do an hour or so after every big event. So I will definitely be doing a live stream. I'll do it right from the car again, so there's no issues and it'll start at the right time. But I'll do it right after UFC 249 this Saturday night. So if you guys want to mark that down, in fact, I'll throw it up on YouTube when we're done with the chat, so it's there and you can bookmark it if you want. But that's the kind of thing I'm most excited about. The two things I want to do, and I'd like to get your opinion on this, is I want to do uploads that are detailed analysis or breakdowns of a specific moment or behavior or personality and put those out a couple times a week, and then do at least one, but maybe multiple live streams throughout the week to cover more of the news that's going on and the banter and the discussions. And as I've said before, I will be bringing in phone calls and video calls so that all of you can have much more impact on how the show works and get your voice heard. That's a big part of what I want to do as well, is in time help create another avenue for more people to express their thoughts about MMA. As we talked about in the previous live stream, the gatekeepers in the MMA media landscape, they're very persnickety, and they love to ban people and shut them down and shut down conversations. They don't want to talk about anything difficult. They simply don't allow it, and that's I would like to provide and be a part of a community that's basically the opposite, where whether you're 12 years old or 85 years old, you can act enough like an adult to have a conversation, and you can disagree and you can get things wrong, and nothing's terminal. You make a mistake, we correct it together, we figure it out, and we move forward. It's not all this banning and cursing people. And if you don't agree with me, then you're an idiot. The thing that I've seen throughout the debate of whether UFC should even hold an event during a pandemic, what I've seen from the MMA media is a large portion of them are silent. I think actually more than 50% are fairly silent on that issue. That leads me to believe that they're either optimistic about the chances of the event going on without being a huge health problem, or they're at least willing to have a nuanced discussion. But it's that 30 or 40% of the MMA media that anybody who doesn't agree with the thing they're saying that moment is an idiot. They don't debate ideas. They don't debate stats or facts or any of those things. They simply, straw man whomever comes up against their position. Some more questions. Well, yeah, okay, let's just jump into the first fight. Ferguson versus Gaethje. I'm not. My thing isn't making predictions because that's too narrow of a scope for what I enjoy doing. But what I do enjoy is trying to think about the two or three different ways a fight might go. And when I look at those two maniacs getting in the cage together, one is just, can you imagine how exciting that's going to finally be when somebody, another top 5 guy, is willing to get in the cage with Ferguson? I'm just happy that Ferguson has had at least some limelight in the last year or so, because he just has not. He's not been able to shine, and part of that's his own personality and not doing very much media and being a bit um, difficult to appreciate maybe on the first interaction with the guy or the first time seeing him in an interview. I think the my thumbnail sketch of what their fight would look like is I think Gaethje I think Gaethje, for all of his skills, his biggest his biggest asset is his heart and his mind, his determination. You think about his fight against Poirier, that was so close to going Gaethje's way. And a lot of people have said, well, maybe now if you were to fight him again, he would do better. And I think that's probably true. Um, I think Trevor Whitman has really integrated the sense of game plan into what Gaethje's doing rather than him just going out there and trying to, I believe what he was doing before. When he came into the UFC, he knew the level of competition was going to be way up. And Gaethje sort of famously always fought down to the level of competition. I remember watching him in the other organization and was fighting like Palomino and some of these other guys who, I mean, they're all tough dudes. So I'm not crapping on them, but they're not UFC caliber guys. They're mid-tier Bellator at best. A lot of the guys that uh, Gaethje fought, and it didn't matter the best guy he fought. He fought the exact same way as the least talented guy he fought, and he'd fight down to the level where these guys were, landing big bombs and he's staggering around. I think Gaethje is really, he and his coach have cleaned up a lot of that mess that used to uh, just accrue sort of on the windshield of Gaethje's game plan. If you think about Gaethje going into a fight, like driving a car through a snowstorm, and you've got shitty wiper blades, and inevitably with your shitty wiper blades, just the snow turns into slush and then ice, and then you can see less and less and less out your windshield, and pretty soon you're just bent down looking just over the dash and trying to look out the little square that's kind of clear. I think that's how fighting was for Gaethje, that he maybe have 4 or 5 ideas of what he'd like to implement during a fight. And once he got hit, he would just throw out 3 of the things that he'd planned to do and move forward with until he got down to the point where he's just looking out this very small hole. and he could only think of one thing, that's basically hurt the other guy, impress your will through violence on the other guy, and hopefully he'll quit before I'm forced to quit. Well, we saw in the Cowboy fight and the Barbosa fight before that, where Gaethje seemed to have a lot more control. Follow through with my metaphor, maybe Trevor Whitman changed the wiper blades for him, and now even when the snow gets heavy, he can see through most of the windshield. So he's doing things like pivoting out of the pocket, getting out of the line of fire, getting his head off the center line, using a variety of combinations so it's not so easy to time him. Even Michael Johnson was able to time him and really set the dude up, and damn near won that fight. So I'm expecting to see the best Justin Gaethje we've seen. I believe that he was training for a very long time for this fight. In fact, we know he was. He was in the gym with his coach before Khabib even officially pulled out. So I think he's going to be as in shape as he ever is, and whatever difficulties he has because of the pandemic, Ferguson has the same thing, except for the way Tony goes about his life. You can't make it more sort of chaotic than he made it for himself. So right now probably feels normal to Tony. So I'll finish talking about Gaethje. I think we're going to see the best Gaethje we've ever seen, and he's going to have a good game plan, and it's going to be based 90% around the leg kicks, and he's going to try to punish Tony's knee. And we saw against Pettis at UFC 229, Pettis landed a couple pretty heavy leg kicks to the knee region, and it was to the knee that Tony had monkeyed up and did not look good. You could see just for a moment things shifted for Ferguson, and he did not like that. Now he was able to push through it, and that was just after he came back well earlier than anybody expected. So perhaps I would expect Ferguson's legs to be in as good a shape as they can be, but still Gaethje's leg kicks are top of the food chain. And that's the kind of thing that if you can get a few of those, it changes the entire tenor of the fight. So I think that's what has to happen for Gaethje to have a real shot, is in the first round. If he doesn't get on the leg kicks and hurt Ferguson's legs in the first round, then it's too late. There's nothing he can do. Whether the fight gets stopped or goes to decision, it'll be Ferguson wins. But if he can start working on Ferguson, it might take another 2-3 rounds, or might even go to decision. But if he can start chopping that tree down and see results in the first round, then he's got a real shot. Of course, there's always the one-shot knockout, but even though we've seen Tony, people say dazed or whatever, we've seen him react to being hit. Is really the only thing we know. We don't know how hurt he was various times. He's gone into his like ninja routine. Gaethje doesn't have a huge one punch ability. Maybe a head kick, that would be much better for Gaethje if he was going to try to get you out of there with one punch. So I wouldn't expect Gaethje to just be able to land something. Of course, it's possible. So I think it's definitely he has to get on that leg kick train. But if he gets myopic, singular focus on the leg kicks, then that leaves Tony everything else open. So that's not good either. As for Ferguson, there's a little concern about him getting older, I think, at some point, but I think Ferguson's one of those guys who, because of how he's taking care of himself and his genetics, he's a guy that's going to be able to grind and do things for a long time. My expectation is that he's going to walk Justin down like he does everybody else. And he's going to let Justin have some. It's not that he wants to let him have success, but he likes to give his opponent what they want. Because when you think you're getting what you want, it it I think the effect it has is that you don't realize how much damage you're taking. I don't know if that makes sense. This is something I've thought about quite a bit watching all the footage on Ferguson, in that he allows these guys, whether it was Barbosa or Lee or Pettis or even Cowboy in the first part of the first round. I mean, these guys are walking forward. Well, not that much. Tony mostly walks them down, but they're getting a lot of punches off, and they think they're doing what they want to do. And the Cowboy fight's a good example, because Cowboy was still Cowboy until he fought Tony. It was after Tony that Cowboys not looked the same for the most part. And Cowboy looked pretty good, at least viewing it live, he looked pretty good. But if you were watching a little closer, you could see Ferguson was slipping the most damaging punches, and what he was throwing in return was so devastating. But I think because Cowboy felt he was having success, he didn't think about the return punches as much. We see that with fighters all the time. They're landing a bunch of great shots, and they might take one, but they don't react because that's not where their focus is. Their focus is on continuing the successful thing they're doing. So I would expect Tony to give Gaethje enough rope to hang himself. Theoretically, this should be an easy fight for Ferguson, because even in the ways that Gaethje has made improvements, we already mentioned, he should be predictable in that we know Gaethje wants to inflict damage and he wants to end the fight one way or another, either with him on his back or with you on your back. And Tony has so many more weapons. If you think about the way Gaethje gets punch drunk pretty early in a lot of fights, even the ones he's won. And when he gets sort of stumbling around, Tony doesn't have to keep peppering away. He can take him down. He can get him in a grappling position against the cage. There's just a lot of things that Ferguson can implement in the moment and uses creativity that a lot of other fighters aren't going to do, like the Eddie Alvarez fight, or Poirier. These guys who are normally very well-rounded strikers as far as how they fight, and they just got stuck in the mud with Gaethje, and it just so happens that their chin stood up a little better and they had a little bit more firepower. But both of those fights, it's a toss-up. Who's going to win that fight if they do it 10 times in a row? Where with Ferguson, we'll see. He might have a point to prove, but my guess is he's going to get in there, and he's going to enjoy the moment. And I think we'll see within the first minute who's going to win. Gaethje's either going to land some significant some knee strikes to the knee that limit mobility for Ferguson, or you're going to see Ferguson creative and walking Justin down and you're not going to have to walk far because the guy's going to be right in front of you. So if I had to lay money, I would on Ferguson for sure. But again, it's one of those things where it could go either way because both men have so much talent. That's the great thing about the fight and the shitty thing, because both of these guys should be challenging for the belt. We know this is for the interim belt. Under the old matchmaker, his mantra was always, we have a champ, and then I try to build guys up who can beat the champ. And we've lost that in the Endeavor era. I don't know if it's just about money or building the brand or maximizing things because of the contract with ESPN. Or hold on a second, just rolling up my window. I don't know if they're trying to maximize the deal with ESPN, but they've definitely been going for the showier fights and ones that have regional relevance. So, okay, a couple more questions. Yeah, Young Visionary says, remember that Gaethje got Tony's leftovers. Yeah, and that's true. We've seen that in other divisions. Same can be said for Khabib. Um, uh, Navad Drew says Alpaca just said Lee lost every minute of that fight. I'm not saying from the Kevin Lee, Tony Ferguson fight. When I say Kevin was never winning, I don't mean on the scorecard. He was absolutely winning on the scorecards in the first round. He had the takedowns, he had the control, he had a top, he mounted, he had the ground and pound. So he definitely won that round. In fact, if you weren't paying close attention, you could call it a 10-8 round for Lee. But was he actually winning? No, because all the things he did, he just emptied his gas tank in one round. And and Ferguson was getting what he wanted out of that fight. So that's what I'm saying. Not that he literally didn't win the first round. Lee definitely won the first round. Okay. Jason Williamson says, I love and know Tony will win. Yes. Perhaps. What's great is if Ferguson can use this as a springboard, if he beats Gaethje and is able to keep himself in the limelight, it would. He needs leverage, so he needs to have the kind of win that can give him leverage and force the UFC's hands. Because I think we're all a little bit worried that every time Dana White opens his mouth, he's talking about, well, I don't know if we can match Ferguson up again with Khabib. Be the sixth time. Okay, but why would you punish Ferguson for what's happened? But I've got the sneaky suspicion that Dana White is going to try to get Conor in there against Khabib, because Khabib's only got a couple fights left. And from the UFC's perspective, they want to use him as a regional draw, and open these different regions around, Russia and throughout the Middle East and parts of North Africa. There's a lot of places where Khabib is a legitimate superstar. Now the guy doesn't really draw as far as pay-per-view numbers, and I mean, Jesus, they had him in that tent in what wasn't Abu Dhabi, was it? Wherever he fought Poirier. And that tent didn't even hold 10,000 people. Actually, after the fact, I went through and I did a rough count, and yeah, it looked like maybe there was 8,000 people there. And they never announced the gate. I don't know if it was free or you had to be connected to the king or whatever they've got going on over there. But the UFC was not making money on that. They were making money on getting this contract with Abu Dhabi and the United Arab Emirates paid a huge, I can't remember now, but it was something like $300 million for 5 years worth of fights. That's where they're getting money from Khabib. And you don't get that from any other fighter on the roster. So it makes sense that they want to use him in the unique way that he's an absolute superstar. But you can't foul Tony Ferguson up to do it. Okay, I have a couple prepared videos, and I want to play part one right now. It's about a minute and a half. It's Chael Sonnen talking to Ariel Helwani, and Chael brings up this idea of what I was just talking about, Tony Ferguson being screwed, and that it's up to Chael and members of the media, but also the fans, to stand up and not allow Ferguson to get screwed in this situation. Because, you know, regardless of who your favorite fighter is, you can objectively see that Ferguson has gotten the short end of the stick. I mean, the guy did win the interim belt. And the only reason they were calling it, why was that for an interim belt and Khabib fighting Ally Quinta wasn't for an interim belt? That's just capricious. That's just in the moment the UFC says we're going to do this. But it allowed the UFC to strip Ferguson when he still fought on the same card as Khabib with his next fight. So here is part one of Chael putting forth this idea.
It is very fascinating that you're now getting Tony Ferguson to agree to something, that he's going to go and put all these things on hold, take all of these different – Gaethje is too, in fairness, but look at Tony's perspective, because you're going to promise him this belt, but that's the same belt that he not only was promised before, he won before, he never lost, but somehow doesn't maintain the title. It's actually a very interesting thing, and we do need to band together as media members and as fans and stand up this time against the machine and make sure that Tony Ferguson, should he win, does not lose the title anywhere unless it's in the octagon. Do you agree?
I agree. And what's happened to Tony, I mean, the bad luck that this man has run into, and of course now it's a global pandemic, is really mind-boggling. When normalcy resumes, or when the time comes to book Khabib and Conor in their next fights, the UFC will have to book them against each other because they stand to make so much more money when those two guys fight, and Tony will get screwed. So I'm not dismissing that. I think it's a very big possibility that he wins on April 18th. Tony Ferguson wins the interim belt, and his next fight isn't against either Conor or Khabib.
All right. So that was part one. There's a second part where Chael gets more specific, and I'm wondering what you all think of that. That it's sort of the duty of the fan base to stand up for Tony. I think on one level, I go back to Tony's before he lost to Michael Johnson. He was having a lot of success and, coming off the Ultimate Fighter. And he said, look, I don't care how long it takes me. I'm not in it for money. I'm not in it for this or that. I just want to fight all the best guys. And that's what he's done. He stayed true to his ethos. But it definitely has cost him in dealing with UFC and in constantly getting the short end of the stick. And yeah, they're going to screw over Ferguson. I'm going to play part two now because I think it's actually the more interesting part.
100%. And there is possible, Errol, that you and
Hold on here. What's going on? Now I also have a phone ringing. Sorry about this. All right. There we go. There's part 2.
100%. And there is possible, Errol, that you and I right now, starting this dialogue and starting the pushback for what I'm calling the potential screw job to happen, are going to psychologically change things. I'm being very literal when I say to you, we, not just you and I, all of the listeners, must be prepared to stand up this time. If we're going to have some kind of an interim championship, we must stay within some kind of lanes. And I do believe the interim champion automatically qualifies without question or debate, and I do not care about the money. At some point, we have to come to the integrity of the sport. He automatically qualifies to fight for the undisputed championship.
All right. That wraps up what old Uncle Chael had to say. And I agree with some of you saying that Chael is an entertainer, and it's interesting to pick apart some of his techniques as a entertainer or broadcaster. Sometimes he makes mistakes on purpose because that causes interaction. But using Chael's language, I believe this is a shoot. He's giving the straight deal here. He honestly looks at Ferguson and says, why is this guy not gotten the chance for the actual belt? You can, any one of the times things didn't go his way, you can say, okay, well, these circumstances fell together. But when you start to see 5 and 6, 7 different details coming together, again, it creates a pattern that's difficult to ignore. So I think it's really interesting what Chael is saying there, that it's finally time for him and Ariel, but the media as a whole, to stand up and be honest about what's going on. And my point is, if the UFC is not going to have the best fight the best, then I think it's, if we're sure that that's what's happening, then we need, as a fan base and as a media, to try to put pressure so that fighters spread out to different organizations. Right now, almost all of the very top talent is in the UFC. If you're looking at the elite talent, 99.5% of it is in the UFC. There are very good fighters in other organizations, but when you're talking the 98, 99th percentile, they're almost all in the UFC, and it's not even close. I'm trying to think of an absolute elite fighter. I mean, the closest thing that I can think of offhand would be Gegard Mousasi, but I don't see him as a 99 percentile kind of guy because he's never had that kind of career. He's very good, very good. He's in the 95th percentile, but not the 99th. But if the UFC is not going to husband the sport in a legitimate way, then their stranglehold on the talent has to be broken, and they have to be put in a position where other organizations have the incentive, meaning people watching, to get more of the talent so they can possibly match them against each other. Now, I hate this idea. Navid says Gegard and Lima. Yeah, Lima, he's, very good. I think he's 92nd, possibly 95th percentile. Very good fighter, but he's one of those guys. He's one of the handful of guys that you don't know what you have. He would have to fight. He would have to fight in the UFC. You'd have to see him over the course of 5 or 6 fights in the UFC, because it's not just fighting the top guys. It's amazing you bring somebody in. It's like basically like Gaethje. He almost lost to Michael Johnson. Michael Johnson had a moment where he was in the top 5, and he had his moments when he looked like he was a potential champ of a division early in his career, and that never panned out. But to have to face guys like that on your way up the ladder, that's incredibly difficult. You just don't have that in Bellator. My problem is I have no belief that Scott Coker wants to run a legitimate, consistently legitimate fight dynamic. I think he's much more interested in controlling outcomes and building superstars that way. And it doesn't mean that his product isn't good and not worth watching, but I think we've seen in the past the UFC did a very good job of having the best fight the best. The term I think about is imprimatur. That's the idea of somebody with authority putting their stamp, basically their stamp of approval on something. And that's the power that the UFC has had for at least the last decade. And they were able to ensure that the best fought the best. And the few stragglers, that the Douglas Limas and guys like that were outside of the UFC, it was incumbent upon them to come to the UFC if they wanted to fight for the title of best in the world. Where now, I mean, why would Michael Chandler come to the UFC if he didn't think Khabib was going to fight him? You know, is the guy really going to go on a 12-fight win streak in the UFC and beat everybody and have a better record than Khabib, and then Khabib refuses to fight him, and then so you still don't? You know, that's what the UFC is in danger of doing. You know, they're not sure who they are right now. That's my take on the UFC, and this is my take from before the pandemic. I mean, right now, you know, could be pulled out, but it's, as I said in the last live stream, made sense to me. You know, him and Amanda Nunes and Rose Namajunas. I mean, those three big names. Those are the three biggest names to come out and say, "Hey, I'm not going to fight anybody right now. My head isn't on straight. I can't prepare properly, and I'm not going to put my body, my health, and the health of my loved ones at risk." And I completely respect that opinion from all three of them. So I'm not judging this one instance as the whole thing, but I do agree with Chael that there needs to be a shift in the media, particularly because they've given cover to Khabib and the UFC. And if Tony wins, or if Gaethje wins, but more specifically, if Tony wins, you can't put another headline on your website saying, "Oh, Khabib wants to fight GSP. Wouldn't that be fun?" Or Khabib wants to fight Mayweather. Wouldn't that be fun? Or Khabib wants to fight Dustin Poirier, or the winner of Dustin Poirier and you know, the champ from 145 pounds. If the media hadn't been on board with that, then the UFC would have never gotten away with the subterfuge, the trickery of getting Khabib an opponent who was a 145 pounder for his last title defense. So that is that. I'm not trying to talk on Khabib the whole time, but you can't talk about Ferguson without talking about Khabib, which is why if you can ever force the Dagestani into the octagon with Ferguson, it's going to be the greatest fight of all time. It may not look like the greatest fight of all time. Who knows what it'll look like? But just the idea of having them together would be amazing. All right, a couple more questions. Yeah, it's actually disgusting how the UFC treats Tony. I think that's true. Um, the Infinite Corner says Tony is the real champ, anyways. And see, I don't like that idea. While I completely understand where the commenter is coming from, and you definitely can look at the resumes and see Tony's fought the better competition. He's looked better, and if nothing else, he's been more willing to fight whomever UFC wanted to put in front of him. And he never lost his title, and him beating Kevin Lee at the time they fought, don't forget that was less than a week after, or 9 days after, that crazy SOB shot and killed all those people in Las Vegas. That probably would have rattled Khabib too much. He would have pulled out. He would have found a reason, or he would have missed weight, just like he did at 209. But Tony was there, Kevin was there, and they fought, and it was a very good fight. Kevin Lee he's got problems, so he is unable to perform his best fight in and fight out. That's a different story. But he was at his he had staff, but that's like McGregor and his bad foot, or whomever else and their injuries that they talk about. Nobody goes in there 100%. Outside of the nagging injury, Kevin Lee was on a great run. He was in a good headspace, and he just came up against a guy that was from a different galaxy as far as mental strength and fortitude and knowing what he wanted to do. So to me, I just want to see the best fight the best. All right. Another question. Oliver Dean asks, what's your thoughts on Cruz versus Cejudo? It's kind of running under the radar, and I think Cruz is going to come back to be one of the biggest names in MMA. Yeah, I'm not sure about that fight because I don't think any of us know well, nobody knows how Cruz is going to look coming back. It's easy to have a positive opinion about it, and I do. I think Cruz is probably going to look pretty damn good, but we don't know just how good Henry Cejudo is. When you look and compare him from the first time he fought Mighty Mouse until the second time he fought Mighty Mouse, and then to go on and beat Marlon Moraes, which I think is his most impressive feat. Not just because Moraes is such a good fighter. Obviously, Mighty Mouse is a Hall of Famer. He's a generational talent, especially at 125 pounds. But Mighty Mouse has never been a guy to take chances. He's never been a guy to push the gas. When he had Cejudo hurt in the first round, he did nothing with it. And then did nothing but make excuses about how big Cejudo was after the fact, and talked about injuries that weren't actually injuries. Where Marlon Moraes had all this success and was beating the hell out of Cejudo, and Cejudo made some adjustments, but most importantly, reframed his mental approach, is what it looks like to me, was able to come out starting in that second round and turn things around. And it's very rare to see top level fighters where one guy gets so much momentum and has so much success to then have it turned around and then the other guy dominates. Amazing fight. It's one of the I've definitely put it in my top 10 amazing feats within MMA to be able to come back like that. So, is that the best Cejudo can be? to be able to come back like that? Or does he have more? We don't know. I really wish it was a normal fight week, and so we would get banter between Cruz and Cejudo. Hopefully, they'll figure out a way to put them on split screen and do some live interviews with them together, just not in the same room. I mean, it has to happen. I remember, I'm sure you all remember back to Jon Jones and Daniel Cormier. I mean, one of their famous tete-a-tetes was on a split screen, hey, you still there, pussy, and all that. Yeah, so I think you can get some really good cringe versus intellectual cringe battle going on with those two. How it goes in the fight, geez, I just don't know. Yeah, it's one of the few fights I just have no sense for. But I'm looking forward to it. I enjoy Cruz as a commentator a lot. I know he rubs some people the wrong way, but I really like the guy. And what I like is he sees things that some of the other guys don't see. And he brings it up, and he's not afraid to push back if Joe Rogan or whomever else is trying to sort of silence that perspective. I really like Cruz. I think a good team would be Cruz and Dan, English guy. I'm only thinking Dan Hooker. You guys know who I'm talking about, though. Dan Hardy. I think Dan Hardy, Dominick Cruz, and John Anik would be a really good three-man booth because Hardy has a lot of energy, and sometimes you need that with Cruz. He doesn't always bring the energy. He's being more cerebral, but I think they would feed off each other, and then you get Hardy bringing some of the things he knows because he has this great perspective on fight sport. So I'd like to see that. But just to see Cruz and Cejudo go at it, I'm very excited for that. We did have, I can't go back far enough now, and I missed the name at the time. Somebody gave, what do they call it when you give money to the guy? Okay, for somebody who's spamming. Force Sohaib? Soheeb? You're spamming, dude. So would you stop? If you want to ask a question, go ahead and ask a question. You've got my attention. But right now you're just shitting all over everybody by spamming the chat section. So please don't do that. All right. Oh, super chat. Thanks, Lyndon. Tim R says he blocked the guy for himself. Yeah, I don't know. I'd like to avoid blocking people or banning people. I'm not even sure how. Do I double click on the guy? Could I? Yeah, I don't even know. I don't know how to do that. I don't want to block him. I think just talking to the guy, he wants attention. Eventually, it's not that I want to give the most annoying people attention, but I believe people act out for a reason. And sometimes if you give them the initial thing that they think they want, but you don't give it to them in exactly the way they want, you can change behavior and they can become a decent member of the community. Like, why did the guy show up? Do you think he just showed up to, shit all over the thing we're doing here? I think there aren't that many people that actually do that. They're looking for something. And oftentimes they have resentment. So they might resent that somebody else is getting the attention. But if you can show that there's a way for them to fit in. There's a place for them too. It's just my experience that you can get people to, you know, you can get people to not be complete assholes. I guess I'll put it that way. But moving forward in the future, I will try to work with people, especially once I have the ability to talk on the phone or through Zoom. But I'm not going to let it slow the show down or the things that we're trying to do. Thank you, Michael Williams, for the super chat, $5. I really appreciate that. I had decided that I really appreciate, actually helps a lot to get some donations from you folks. I feel like I don't deserve it because I haven't been on time yet and I haven't been able to get episodes up. I do appreciate it very much. You know, like a lot of you, I'm not working, and I definitely, trying to do stuff with the property and building another structure on the property so that I can get a setup and actually do a whole show from my own place rather than trying to do it out of my car, because I do have pretty big ambitions for where I'd like to see things go. So every dollar helps, but I don't want the super chat to clog things up either, or make people feel like the only way they can get their questions answered is by doing it, or I spend too much time with the super chat people. One thing I will say is if I don't recognize your super chat because I'm in the middle of talking about other things or part of a different discussion, I will, moving forward, I will recognize everybody who gives the super chat in the next episode that I do. And if I didn't answer your question, I will answer the question either in the next live stream or the next episode that I upload. But I can jump on Michael Williams' question right here. Who do you think will dictate the pace of the first round between Tony and Gaethje? That is a great question, because that I think maybe that even gets to the core of what I was trying to talk about with those two. I'm not sure I have an answer to that, but the question itself might be the perfect filter to watch the fight through. Who is dictating the pace? Not just delivering more damage or seeming to have more success or have more of a positional advantage, but who's dictating the pace? You know, I would say that there's going to be large stretches of the first round where nobody's dictating the pace, that they're both fighting to try to dictate the pace, because neither of these guys are based in counter striking. Tony does a lot of counter striking, and he kind of goes under the radar, doesn't get as much credit for it. But his overall mindset is to move forward and dictate pace. And I think when, as a fight stretches out, nobody dictates the pace as well as Tony. Now, if Justin can get the upper hand, he's the same thing, you know. But same for a limited amount of time, where he can go whole hog. So I think that first round, it's going to be back and forth. I think they'll both dictate pace a little bit. Towards the end of the round, I think you'll start to see Tony pull away, or maybe Tony get a position, and then by the second round, if we go back over Tony's last few fights, that second round does a hell of a lot of damage. So it's a whole different thing. And like when you have legitimate badasses like Tony Pettis and Cerrone and even Barbosa. I mean, those dudes all quit. And I'm not saying that to be a dick. They legitimately all quit. And who wouldn't have? Tony Ferguson steals your soul. He just does. So that first round is going to be goddamn amazing. So yeah, that's my thought. It's going to be amazing. I also want to look at, see if we can get this going properly. Just kind of look at the whole. Yeah. There we go. Now if I can just use the internet but avoid you seeing my browsing history, we'll be all fine. So UFC 249 has 11 fights. And we've talked about the top 2 fights for basically an hour. And the fights just sort of keep getting better as you look at it. I look at not a huge Sam Alvey fan, just my thing. The guy kind of, it's one of the few fighters that actually bothers me. I actually think he's cringy, and he slows fights down, and I don't care that eventually he knocks a dude out. Not a big fan, so it'll be interesting to see what Ryan Spann can do. Rosa versus Mitchell, good early fight. Then you get to, it's the third fight of the night. You've got Luque versus Nico Price, and these guys are absolute certified badass madmen fighters. Nico Price, clearly the less orthodox guy, and I think that caused him to sort of fly under the radar a little bit, or not even fly under the radar because he was getting attention, but short shrift from a lot of the so-called experts. The only thing I knew about Nico Price from watching his first fight was this dude just does damage. He figures out a way to hurt people, and he's also a little bit wild, so he's going to lose some fights that he otherwise could win. And Vicente Luque, other than this little skid he's had recently, just been seemingly unbeatable. This should be. Luque has shown a lot more tactical wherewithal, for sure. But, it only takes a weird hammer fist from the bottom from Price to throw all those tactics right out the window. Next fight, Jacare versus Uriah Hall. That's again great fight. I think both guys are somewhat in a similar position, in that if they're hoping to make a run or get on a streak, it's now or never. And yeah, I don't know. I would suppose Souza's really going to return to his roots and try to take Hall down. But, you know, Hall has shown, intermittently has shown that can be a more balanced fighter. Tim R says, yeah, Mitchell and Rosa will be very interesting, both amazing grapplers. Yeah, that's a good point. Rosa had that crazy submission. I think that was his last fight. And that was the one where it took people a minute to realize that he had his foot in the cage, his toes in the cage to do it. But even the fact that he figured that out, he was using anything to lock in. I don't see that as dirty per se. I see that as in the moment you're trying to lock everything down. I think that's much more the grappler's mentality. When you see a striker grabbing the fence, it's usually to save themselves. I think it comes from a different place. Yeah, was it Mitchell's last fight or the fight before? Didn't he hit the oh, it's not the tornado. He did the twister. Yeah, he had the twister. So yeah, you're right. I hadn't thought about that fight just as these two grappling maniacs. That's absolutely right. You got Esparza versus Watterson. Mm, be all right. Some people really love Michelle Watterson. Um, she's a product of that fight camp. She makes that fight camp there in New Mexico. Greg Jackson and the boys, they make people better. But one of the ways they do it is they sort of level things off. So they take the tops of the mountains off to fill in the valleys. And that's why you see somebody like Michelle Watterson, who used to be the karate hottie, not do much karate and do a whole bunch of grappling. Because in her division, if you can get a position, you can ride out a victory pretty easy. Because a lot of those girls, you know, quite honestly, just can't handle any amount of grappling. That's not true with Carla Esparza. That's her wheelhouse. So from that perspective, maybe I've talked myself into in 30 seconds looking forward to that fight as well, because Esparza should be able to take away Watterson's recent tendency towards seeking a positional advantage, but not being dynamic with it. One thing I will say about Michelle Watterson, she has tiny predatory teeth. If you've ever seen her smile, it's very weird. She has these tiny little teeth that makes her look like a predator. It's kind of interesting. So when you see her and she looks sort of sweet and innocent, and then she has this smile like there's a whole demon behind that visage of hers. Watterson by fine body. Yeah, just not my type, apparently. Not that Esparza is. I guess, I don't know. Anyway, uh, looking through some questions here. Okay, so you guys are conversing with each other, which is very good. That's cool too. Uh, Next fight, Verdum versus Olenek. Who knows? It's one question. I know some people have brought it up, but I've not seen definitive answers, and that's where's the drug testing going to be vis-a-vis where it was before the pandemic and now during the pandemic. Are they really going to be flying a bunch of people around the world to test a bunch of fighters? I imagine they'll have a high level of testing um, for the right before and right after, but you know, are they flying to anybody's training center to test them beforehand? I don't think so. I say that just because Verdum, he's been on the Chael Sonnen supplement list at least once, so any benefits he might need to bang out in the months or the last several weeks, he could get a lot of things in and out of his system before the 9th. So I think we'll see as good of a Verdum as he can be. And Olnick, how can you not root for the guy? He's just one of those dudes. I just want to see him win. I just want to see him do a good job. And there's his wife, this tallest blonde Russian you've ever seen, and she's the one that keeps his head on straight. She's so serious and on the ball, and I can only imagine. I don't want to say taskmaster, but that's what she seems to me, just very detail oriented. And the two of them as a team, I think is charming as hell. So I like to see good things for him. That'll be interesting. My guess is people are going to talk about it and talk about the grappling. I don't think it ever goes to grappling. I don't think Verdum. Why would Verdum even want it to go to the grappling? I think he's going to use his uh, presumed striking advantage to just try to take Olenek out. Pettis versus Cerrone. I don't know how shot both guys are. I think Pettis has lacked motivation for a very long time. He's lacked identity for a long time. I'm always leery when guys continually come out like every 6 months or year and they have a whole new lease on life. So, oh, well, before I was partying or I wasn't taking this seriously, but now I've got it right. I'm doing it the way I used to do it. You know, I think most of the time the guys are telling the truth, but they're telling the truth as they want it to be. They're not working with people that are capable of and I'm talking about like counselors or shrinks. They're not working with mental coaches who are able to get them to first principle problems. So whatever Anthony Pettis's first principle foundational problems are in his life, they could be things from his childhood that he's just not worked through and he's not integrated. Until he deals with whatever those are, he's going to have to keep reinventing himself. As for Cerrone, except for the last couple fights that were completely uninspiring, he wins a bunch in a row and he loses a bunch in a row. The guy probably never going to win the big fight. He never has. It's just not his jam. There's a little bit of unease when I think about the fight because it could be kind of ugly. Could be ugly for either guy. I think they're both going to try to rise from the ashes of their own career by snuffing out the light of the other guy's career. My guess is Pettis is, he should have the advantage because of the way their first fight went, but it's a fight in the middle of the card. It's not at the top of the card. So without the lights being as bright, who knows how Cerrone will go. I've not been a big fan of how Cerrone has fought when he has Joe Schilling in his corner. That's nothing about the guy personally, but he brings. I think about the way he was talking to Cerrone during the Ferguson fight. The guy gets so emotionally invested, and Cerrone's clearly his brother, the brother in arms, and he has a lot of respect. And I think he does more to agitate and undermine Cerrone's attempt at being calm. Joe Schilling's the guy you want if you're hanging out at the lake, everybody's drinking, and you get into a fight with somebody because you're playing music too loud. Joe Schilling's the guy you want having your back. But I don't think he's a good coach or corner man during a fight, at least not for Cerrone. So I think if Pettis can, any small advantage Pettis takes early in the fight, I think quickly expands to, lights out. What are the questions we have? Oops. Jumping over to some of these other things. Oh, I forgot I had it on the screen. Yeah, if you want to ask questions on Twitter, that's cool too. I don't know that I'll keep going back to it or not. So other questions, and then we'll finish up the rest of the card. John P. What are you trying to ask there, buddy? Yeah, Tim R says he's still got Pettis. I think so, but is this the kind of fight that Cerrone feels comfortable with? You know, does he not feel pressure in the situation? That'll be a huge thing. Okay. Jesus Hernandez asks, "Is the hotline open?" And it's not. It's not yet, but soon. Um, I would expect that I'll have some way for you guys to dial in live by Saturday night, next Saturday. So, in case you weren't here at the beginning, um, I will be doing a live stream at least an hour or 45 minutes, depending on how late it is. But I'll jump in and do a live stream after the fight, just so we can all talk about what we saw, what was interesting. What else do we have here? Yeah, some other things I wanted to get to specifically. Oh, I did raise the question in the description of this live stream that does this mean we're getting back to normal? And I meant that fairly, you know, just rhetorically. I mean, clearly things aren't back to normal. A lot of people are having a difficult time. So things aren't normal in that they're the same. But if you have some people trying, like you had like what Sweden did, where they went for herd immunity against the virus. And I'm not going to get into a bunch of pandemic talk, but only to say that in situations that are complex, that's when diversity actually matters. For its own sake, as a single variable, it seldom has any relevance. But when you're in a myopic state, or you're in a static state where everybody is fearful to do something outside of the norm or outside of what's safe or what's perceived as safe, or uh, having, it's not even the safe, it's that people are acting, and I don't mean people, regular people, I mean politicians and bureaucrats. They only have the incentive to avoid risk. So, of course, all of their ideas are going to involve things that mitigate their risk in their careers. So, you need outside people. You need crazy people like Tony Ferguson. If everybody fought like Khabib, how boring would the sport be? Right now, he's got a few guys on his team that fight a little bit like him, but pretty much he's the only guy. Thought for a minute maybe Ben Askren would kind of pull the same Khabib stuff as he did in other places outside of the UFC, but he wasn't able to. He didn't have the ability to do it against higher grade of competition. And when it comes to business and life in general, it's been a good 40 days where everybody pretty much around the world has been like, hey, let's all get on the same page. So, not just from a scientific standpoint, but from a philosophic, human, flourishing standpoint, we need people and institutions to start making different decisions that aren't 100% based on risk aversion. I don't think anybody who listens to Dana White talk about the pandemic is, anybody who listens to Dana is not going to come away thinking that guy knows anything about viruses or human health or the medical, uh, best medical practices to avoid wider spread. Nobody would trust Dana because you hear him talk, he sounds like a complete idiot anytime he talks specifics. But he's part of a larger organization that are going to cover their ass. And so they will do as good of a job as anybody and better than most because they aren't so completely risk averse. And I see a lot of people in the MMA media trying to take a jab at the UFC by comparing them to the other sports like the NBA or MLB and say, well, look, these organizations, they're not even talking about starting their season. Well, no, they wouldn't. They have a completely different business model, but they also have a completely different business culture. Those are the most conservative business cultures you can imagine. Those guys stumbled dumbly, for the most part, into the most lucrative position they could possibly be in. Roger Goodell didn't build the NFL into what it is. He didn't take it from nothing and build it into something. He's, uh, you know, held the reins and tried to not make things horrible. Because as long as the NFL just kept moving forward, it was going to grow because of the way media has worked and the important role that sports plays. So the UFC is one of the few significant entities that is not only capable of doing something during a pandemic, but has a mentality that allows them to not be 100% risk averse. So, in that sense, we are getting back to normal because we're going to see a lot of different, we'll get a lot more information too from these events. If there's any amount of oversight, we know there is, and if there's any amount of transparency, and when we know there's some, and we can always push for more, then we can actually gather data from these events and how all the different methods and techniques put in place to restrict transmission, and we can see how it works. I mean, this is hopefully people are paying attention and they're jumping on board and are going to be able to use the efforts of the fighters and the UFC to help open up other industries around, not just around the country, but around the world. Because it's going to have to happen at some point, right? So, in that sense, I think we're heading back to normalcy in that it's okay to rock the boat a little bit. People got real nervous back in April 18th, was getting closer, and they were so afraid of truly fear itself. Not that there weren't legitimate things to fear, but that's not the reaction you saw. When Dana started rocking the boat, you know, if you were on a ship that hits an iceberg and it goes down and a bunch of people die and you happen to make it into a life raft, your anxiety and your sense of fear and your sense of catastrophe is going to be so large that as soon as you get into that lifeboat, you're going to think you're about to die still. But if you know anything about the particular lifeboat, you might know that it's perfectly safe. And yes, we're going to rig it for sail and we're going to ration ourselves until we're found. We're going to ration our food and water. We're all going to be fine. But there'll be some people most people, in fact, will go into a state of catastrophizing, is what they call it, where everything is much more imminent and deadly simply because of the level of your anxiety. So that's what we saw back in April 18th. Just before that, and you had so many members of the usual gaggle, quite honestly embarrassing themselves, you know, not making any sense, but it was because they were talking emotionally. And so you have somebody like Donkerson crying in his own way, talking about how, this is going to be worse than the Black Death and everybody's going to die if the UFC holds one fight. And he's smart enough to know that that's not true. But he was talking and acting purely from an emotional standpoint. And what he felt was true. And so he used words to back up his feelings. And they just came out the way they did. It's interesting now, 3 weeks later, almost nobody feels that way anymore. I think Donk probably does still a little bit. It'll be interesting to find out if he's going to watch the event or not. I'm sure he won't do any coverage of the event leading up to the fact, because I think he promised he wouldn't do that. But it'll be interesting if he watches the event and then talks about it after the fact. So let me answer a couple more questions, and we can wrap this thing up. We've been going a good, hour and a half, hour and 45 minutes. So if we take another 15, that would be 2 hours. I still haven't eaten today. I got up early to work on the technical stuff and then kept pushing things back. So I'm getting a little punchy from that. Plus, I think it's gotten hot in the car. I had my windows up. So there's a big old van about to back into me. Anyway, yeah, so let's grab a couple more questions. Oh, I do want to reiterate that I would like your thoughts, your ideas on what kind of episodes do you want to see from me, say, over the next week? You want me to break down a fight? Do you want me to break down an interview, analyze a particular personality? Truly, I will make the episodes based on what I see from you guys right now in the chat. So if you've ever wanted me to make an episode for you, now's your chance, because that's definitely what I'm looking to do. Because I have a hard time. The two things I have a hard time doing, it's sort of goes back to John Coltrane. When he's real young. I'm definitely not comparing myself to John Coltrane. John Coltrane, he's playing with Miles Davis, playing with the Miles Davis group, and it's clear to everybody what a profound, just genius Coltrane is, even such a young man. And he's got all these ideas. And at the time, especially, I think it was around 1955 is when Coltrane and Davis played together. A lot of the jazz stuff, the songs were shorter because the way the recording technology was something like 3.5 minutes was the longest a song could be. It was right at that time period. And when they would play live, of course, you have a lot more freedom to stretch out. And Miles Davis was having a hell of a time. It's like, I love this guy, Coltrane. He brings a lot as a sideman. He's brilliant. He inspires me, but he just keeps playing. He chorus after chorus after chorus. He just keeps soloing. And finally, Miles Davis pulls Coltrane aside and he says, "Look, man, I don't want to crimp your style, but look, you can't take a 10-minute solo on every song, and I am the leader here. So if anybody's going to be doing it, it's going to be me." And Coltrane earnestly says, "Miles, I don't know where to stop. It's like I start this idea and it's a thread, and and I'm playing off things that you've played, and I just keep going, and I don't mean to hog the the stage or time. I just don't know when to stop. And Miles Davis says, "Yeah, take the horn out of your mouth. That's when you stop. You get your one time around or two times around, and that's it. Take the horn out of your mouth. Whatever you said in that time, that's what you got to say. It's not a forever conversation." And there have been a lot of times in my life when I've thought back to that anecdote. And I definitely have that problem when I go to make episodes because I have reams and reams of papers, of notes, and all this material that I could easily put out. But I start working on it. And once I sort of have enough to do an episode, well, I kind of throw that away thinking, well, now I'm interested in what's a level deeper than that. But I never put out the first level. So in essence, what I'm doing is creating a 5 or 6 part series, but I never release the first 5 parts. I only release the 6th part and call it part 1 and never get to any other parts, because time moves on and you've got to cover what's happening contemporarily with the sport. So if I can get some guidance from you guys about this and ladies, that would be hugely important. So give me an idea or two of the kind of episode you'd like to see. Royal Blood says we could talk about Ryan Hall. Yes. He's poetic. Yeah. He's a guy I would love to talk about. In fact, that's another stage down the road is I want to do some long form interviews. There's not a ton of great interviewers in the sport, and that is one thing I have a lot of experience with. I've made documentary films, but I've also done a ton, hundreds of filmed interviews with people, uh, mostly artists and musicians. I had a lot more access to those types of people. Um, so I'd like to do some true long form conversation type interviews with people, and I think Ryan Hall he'd be right up there if I was picking my first 2 or 3 interviews. Ryan Hall would be up there. Chuck Mendenhall would be another one. Not sure who else. Of course, Tony Ferguson, because I think there's so much to dig into with him if you get him talking. All right. Oh, we didn't even get to Francis Ngannou. I don't want to take too much time on that. We'll have to do that either in the next episode or the next live stream. But I do see Ngannou as a guy who's been just in his own way so overshadowed. He has the best resume in the heavyweight division, over the last several years. He just, I don't understand why there's this, it seems to be this absolute sentiment that if Ngannou fought Stipe, the second fight would go exactly like the first. Where I'm like, okay, there were a couple times where an inch or two one way or another, and it's possible that fight was over with Stipe losing. So, and people overreacted so badly to Ngannou uh, losing to Stipe, and then he lost to Derek Lewis, and people thought he was mentally weak and all those things. That's probably my biggest disappointment in myself is that I have at least 2 episodes worth of material on Ngannou, purely talking about his mental background. And the guy is so much more complex than the way people were talking about him. He's also kind of a bastard. I was noticing how often he hurts people he doesn't need to hurt. He's constantly hurting people, and one-upsmanship with random people is very interesting. He's People painted him as either like this monster or this really good guy who's just a teddy bear. And just like everybody else, he's not one thing. He's a bunch of different things. He's complex, and he's a bad dude. He is a bad dude, and I think he had a huge learning curve on the mental side of things, but didn't know it when he first got into fighting. One, because he had so much success in the beginning, but I think in his life in general, he had a lot of obstacles to overcome, but he didn't have a lot of people to overcome as far as his life, if the distinction makes sense to you. So, yeah, I definitely, and maybe that's what I'll do. Maybe I'll even say that is one episode I'll put out is Francis Ngannou, just running down him and Rosenstruck. I don't know near as much about him. I'd have to dig into him, but I'll put out an episode if that seems cool to everyone. Um, Definitely do a Francis Ngannou episode. Arl Goldberg says, I really enjoy your content. I think to understand Khabib to the fullest, you need to research his faith in Dagestan. However, keep up the amazing content. P.S. Rewatched your video, Jon, Jones versus Smith, 5 times amazing content. Thank you. Yes, and thank you for the 10 pounds. That's amazing. I really appreciate it, Earl. I have a problem saying Earl, like Earl Morris and Earl Goldberg. So I'm not trying to mispronounce your name. It's just one of the names I don't pronounce very well. Um, you're right. Um, you can't understand Khabib if you don't understand his faith and um, where he's from, Dagestan. I'm not an expert on either, although I have dug in fairly deep to both with Khabib. Um, I talk at length about some of that stuff in the first live stream I did, and that's still up, so you can check that out. It's long and rambling. It's a little over 3 hours. Um, I will eventually do perhaps an episode on that. Um, I I gave Khabib an awful lot of credit. I mostly talked positive things about Khabib in that other live stream, and I would like the freedom to be able to talk about his faith and his homeland, but it's so sensitive, and there are all I don't feel that I don't think people see me as the person with good enough faith to dig into something as complex as Khabib's faith and his homeland, because it's really complex stuff, because it's not just your cookie cutter religion. Khabib has a very specific connection to Islam in the history of his region and the history of his people in and outside of the religion. It's all very specific, but it's the kind of thing to produce something effective, you have to have the goodwill to do it. And I don't have that. There's too many people believed I'm biased. Worse than that, they think I hate Khabib or I hate his religion or I hate his homeland, and none of those things are even close to true. Not at all. That's just not how my mind works. It would be boring to hate something that was interesting. There's a lot of things I disagree with. I would never treat my wife the way he treats his wife. And I would take up arms against anybody who tried to force me to treat my wife the way, and I say the way he does, and by that I mean the people of his region who believe what Khabib has said he believes. Because I don't know specifically what Khabib does with his wife. But if it is as it seems, then yeah, that's never going to happen in my house. But that doesn't mean that I can't examine it and talk about it and see where it goes. But as I already stated, you would have to be a person who already had a lot of goodwill, because it's the kind of thing, even if everyone in this chat thought it was an amazing piece that I put out about his religion and his homeland, it's still the kind of thing that, there's that percentage of Khabib fans who are very disruptive, to say the least. And disruptive, like violent, actually violent, not like any other kind of fans. And I'm not worried about myself, but I wouldn't want to get kicked off YouTube. I mean, I've just decided that this is the thing I'm going to do for a while. This is what I'm doing full time. Even after the pandemic, I'm trying to build something. And so there's no way I would jump on a landmine. Even I would be in good faith trying to do it, but I'm not. There's already too much water under the bridge because I've been critical of Khabib. And I don't think, I mean, some people are going to get mad just because I've been critical about the X's and O's with Khabib. But I think what really upset a certain percentage of Khabib fans is that I was disrespectful to Khabib. I made fun of him. And I'm not sorry for that. I make fun of everybody. I make fun of Khabib a little more because nobody else had ever made fun of Khabib for a lot of reasons. And I'm just never going to allow that to, especially in the uploads. We talk about Cavassier, you know, I'm not Cavassier. He's not me. He sort of has his own mentality, and he doesn't take sides. It's a true satire. It's true. He's a true satirist. And to mock some of the things that Khabib has done, I mean, like nobody has said he's humble more than Khabib. Khabib's always saying he's humble. Well, that's self-contradictory. If you're truly humble, you don't talk about it. Now, personally, that's endearing to me. I think it's great. that gives Khabib a little bit of an edge. It makes him interesting, but it makes a small percentage of his fans beyond livid, to the point where they ruin a chat or they ruin the comment section. Just they ruin all kinds of things, and it's not just the annoying ones like Diaz fans or McGregor fans. It's a small, any one of those groups, it's a small number of the fans that are really bad. There's so much backlash against Conor. I feel like you can't even discuss him, and that's an overreaction in my opinion, because Conor has had an extremely significant career, and we can't even at this point. I don't think it's not easy to have a discussion about Conor's career because there's so much hyperbole one way or another. And most of it, people are just goofing, but it muddies the water so badly. So, Earl comes back and says, I know you don't hate it. Saying anything like that is ignorant. I'm just saying so much of his culture and faith affects his decisions in the fight game. As a Muslim, I have a different perspective. Absolutely. And I've been lucky enough, just in doing the internet thing here, just in doing the Alpaca Thesaurus project. Since I started, I used to put a tremendous amount of time into the comment section. In fact, you can go back to those episodes before before my YouTube page blew up a little bit, and got 6 million views on the one video with Khabib and Conor. And that was very controversial to people, and literally tens of thousands of comments where people are literally saying, you say Khabib is afraid, Khabib's not afraid. And I'm using the word properly. Literally in the middle of the video, I stopped the whole video and put on the screen, Khabib is not afraid. I don't think he is. In fact, I can sort of prove he's not afraid. He has these other reasons. And yet, literally tens of thousands of people think that I've said the opposite. That goes back to the muddying the water so much. So now everybody's on edge, and it makes it difficult for any sort of a legitimate discussion. But I was lucky enough to have a few uh, online Muslim friends through this process that I had pretty good conversations with, and some of them were in the comment section. In-depth, detailed, back and forth, talking about some of the details of Islam as a religion and how it helps, especially with discipline. I'm sure Earl, you could attest to this. The idea of, when I think of the devout Muslims that have been in my life, people I've worked with or known otherwise, I've never known any personally that were devout in the way that Khabib is, but part of that is also because of his region in the world, not just because of his religion. But the thing I've always taken away is uh, a very positive sense of self-dignity that the religion cultivates in individuals. There's a lot of very good things I could say about the religion in general, and even specifically how it seems to be that Khabib integrates it into his life. I mean, it's beyond integrated in his life, but I think you know what I mean. So I don't think anytime soon I can do an episode about that, but it's not because I'm not interested. And thanks again for the question. Legate Logan says, do you think Tony has implemented his shadow archetype into his fighting to the most extent, or perhaps has a darker shadow to integrate considering his past? Every fighter has to do that in some way. Yeah, that's a good question. Talking about Jungian archetypes and just the larger psychological uh, idea that an individual has the self that they think of when they think of themselves, which is mostly the positive things, but then there are the darker or shadow or inconsistencies that are also part of who you are and in some ways influence how you behave and what you want. Sometimes it's part of your personality, sometimes it's something that's happened to you, sort of the way a scar, psychic scars, and sometimes they really need to be dealt with. They can't truly heal until you have to prove to your mind that you're not going to let it happen again. That's where severe anxiety comes from, is that your mind has convinced itself that you're not capable of keeping yourself safe. And it becomes a feedback loop and can be extremely debilitating if that happens. It's not exactly what happened with Uriah Hall, but it's part of what's going on with him, and I would imagine it has a lot. It harkens back to his childhood. Um, well, what's Tony's fight name? El Cucuy. He's the boogeyman, and it's not a in Hispanic culture. That boogeyman is not cartoonish and funny. it's actually very scary. So that's part of him integrating a darker side, and the way he is so devastating with his elbows, and he's either going to strangle you out, he's either going to kill you for a second through the way he, because you don't just tap to Tony, you're on the verge of death. It's different between him and, say, like a leg lock. You can break your leg, it's not going to kill you in the same way a blood choke literally will kill you if they hold it a few extra minutes. So if Tony isn't finishing somebody with that kind of a deadly submission, he's cutting them up and destroying them with strikes from, all 8 limbs, but particularly those goddamn elbows of his. So he's extremely violent. And I would think it's probably part of the reason, Tony's taken a while to mature. It's one thing if you're uh, McGregor or Jorge Masvidal and you get one of these 8-second or 13-second knockouts, and people say, "Oh, that's brutal," but it's really clean. That's why we also call it a clean knockout. It's not brutal the way a serial killer is brutal. And Ferguson fights, you know, like a serial killer, um, in that he brings a lot of darkness into his approach. So I don't know if that answers your question exactly. Maybe I'm just backing up and saying that I see what you see, that there's a lot of shadow in what Ferguson does, particularly in the cage, but he's also integrated it in that it hasn't taken him over. It hasn't become a shtick. And you see that with a lot of other fighters. They get known for a certain move or being devastating, and it messes up the rest of their career because they can't live up to what they were able to do in a singular moment. Oh, I did want to also mention about Tony. If you go back to I see that he's becoming quite balanced because he knows what he wants to take part in and what he wants his name associated with. And he's certainly willing to stand up there and be the only guy like himself. Where Khabib travels with 12 to 15 guys. Tony travels by himself. Conor has his crew. Tony, he's by himself. Conor's got his image that he's constantly tweaking, but it's always out in front. Where Tony's, it's too easy to say that he's more authentic, but let's just say he's a lot less scripted. And there's the moment during the press conference with Khabib where a reporter tries a weasel move and asks Tony about his mental health, but frames it by saying, Tony, oh, you're a hero because you talked about your mental health and you had these problems. Could you tell us what that was like? And Tony just shot that down. He saw what this guy is trying to piggyback on an episode in Tony's life that was not easy. And Tony doesn't owe anybody an explanation of what it was like during that time period. And I've tried to be very sensitive to not dig into it. If it was a repeated process, say like with a Jon Jones where he keeps making bad decisions and doing crazy things, then I'd be much more likely to jump in and break it down. But he had some things happen in his life, and I don't think it's that clear exactly what happened. And I think, quite honestly, it's really, at the time, I remember particularly Bloody Elbow. Just so many. There's a few people there that are good, but so many hacks. There's no leadership. the leadership are hacks, and they were trying to twist a narrative that Tony was a wife beater. He's a horrible guy because they just love that song. They love it, and when they can't bring up Greg Hardy, then they found a new one, and they tried to do that with was it Nick Diaz originally? And they run right out there and they want to talk about just all this things with no real evidence, just the first report that isn't official. And I think there should be a price to be paid. That if they're not journalists truly, but they're in the space that journalists usually occupy, and there should be a response. And you should lose credibility if you engage in that kind of just hackery. So, all right. One more question, and we can wrap this thing up. I've really enjoyed it. I really appreciate you guys sticking in there with me. And I was so sure I got up early. I got up before 7 a.m. I don't normally get up that early. I normally get up about 8:30. I got up early today just to make sure the last little things were done. I thought I had everything together. I also spent a lot of time and nearly got to the point where I can take live calls. Couldn't quite do that. And then when I jumped on the live stream, my signal was just crap. And I know it varies. So on my property, I have to use my cell phone reception, and I have 3 devices, and it's really goddamn expensive. Quite honestly, it's almost $400 for these 3 devices to have the kind of data that I need so that I can run these live streams. And it's a bit wearing to have to pay for that and not have it work. I cut down 2 more trees, and the signal got worse. And I know it doesn't have to do with the trees being down. I actually just need to move the site. I need to build a little office, and once I do that, then I'll be fine. Anyways, I thought it was going to be all good this morning so that I could go at 11, and that just wasn't going to happen. And then tried to go at 1, and that didn't happen. So I drove to town, and I really appreciate everybody that stuck around to help me get this thing off the ground. Also, I was wondering, as I am able to do some actual breakdowns during a live stream and bring in calls. So if you think about those 2 things being added to a live stream, if I was doing that plus interacting with the chat, how often would you want me to live stream? I could live stream every day if that was interesting, during the lockdown and everything. If I were to do that, I would do like an hour per day, get in, get out. What's everybody talking about? And I still would be able to work on episodes to upload. But I just want to know what your individual appetite is for things like that. All right. And last question. Oh, okay. Magasma1 says, do you think Nick Diaz entering the USADA testing pool a few months ago and the UFC posting his old fights is enough to suggest that Nick is fighting Jorge soon? I had not thought about him being matched up with Masvidal, but I remember hearing about him being in the pool, and when I saw one of his old fights posted, I did think maybe there was some movement. It would be time it's now or never for Nick if he wants to get back in the fight game. And if he did a big enough fight, it could be a one and done and really be a hell of a lot of money for him. So I I don't think it's quite enough to say that, but I think it's worth keeping our eye on. Although with Nick, I'm not sure I want to see him because I'm not sure why if he's coming back. If he's good mentally, if he's in the right place, then hell yeah, it'd be great to see him. And that would be a fun fight because Masvidal, he's an interesting dude. He's his reformation of his career has been something, and I've wondered just how much uh, the mindset change has made a difference. How much game planning or smoke and mirrors have made a difference with his fights. It'll really, we'll see what's going on with Masvidal if he were to fight Usman next, but um, not very many. Ali Abdelaziz is got a tight reign of control over his fighters, and he's very particular how he runs their careers. I think at the end of the day, he ends up getting them a lot of opportunities and making the best careers possible for them. But it's not necessarily to the benefit of the fighting community. So why isn't Usman fighting? You know, Masvidal against Usman. That's what I want to see. But anyway, Tim R. Yes, says $5. That's cool. I do appreciate that. And he says, thanks a lot. Appreciate your insight and psychological breakdowns. I also look forward to the content you plan to release here in the future. Thank you, my friend. I appreciate that. Ali Shirky says, I got that name messed up. Sorry. Nick's not fighting again. If I had to guess, I would say Nick isn't, but I believe he's thinking about it. If for no other reason, how he's defined himself the majority of his life, all of his adult life, has been fractured since he went away and his brother took off. You know, Nate's bigger than Nick. You know, for some of us older fans, maybe we don't feel that way, but uh, people who've only been watching the last 10 years, you only have a handful of Diaz fights, and they're largely weird and difficult to see why anybody would think he's great. Um, so I guess that goes back to my caveat that if you're going to have Nick Diaz fight, he's got to be coming from the right headspace. Uh, David Strutt, quick one. Sparza Watterson. I did touch on that earlier. I, quite honestly, I think I would say Watterson just because she has more ways to go, and I think against the Sparza because she's very she's like day old oatmeal when it comes to striking, just sluggish, stuck in the mud, not the opposite of dynamic. Her striking is just not going to get it done, and I think Watterson typically from here on out is going to employ the the Jackson Wink game plan of wrestling when you can and getting position when you can, and then getting the judges on your side. But yeah, I would say Watterson. She might put on a hell of a performance, but I like Esparza. She's kind of the little train that could, and there was a time when I wasn't as appreciative of her place in the sport, but she redoubled her efforts at some point. After being so outclassed by Joanna and others, she doubled down and she got a lot more gritty. And so nothing but respect for both those gals. Um, yeah, so I would say, yeah, definitely leaning towards Watterson because um, she has more possibilities, more ways to win, as they say. But who knows? I think Esparza still working with Angie Hill, and that gal is just good energy, you know. So if she's in your training camp and inspiring you, and that's one way to get out from being stuck in the mud. So maybe Carla's going to bring something a little more than what we've seen in the past. That's kind of me sitting on the fence there. Legate Logan asks and gives 10, says NZ, is that New Zealand? Are you in New Zealand? $10 one way or another, wherever it's from. That's awesome. I really appreciate it. And he says, or I assume it's in him, Logan. Love your videos. Good to hear from you again. Make something you actually enjoy. If the outcome of a video, if the outcome of a video you seek doesn't come, then there may be gold somewhere else on the rock, so to speak. I appreciate that. Yeah. Yeah. That's true. I feel such a obligation to I have so much respect for the support and appreciation for the support, and I don't just mean money. I mean all the good comments and all the critical comments and people taking time. I have so much appreciation for that. It is hard for me sometimes to think that, oh, I should just do exactly what I want to do and screw if anybody else likes it or not. That's how I normally think, and that's definitely how I started the YouTube channel, is just doing the weird, crazy things that were interesting to me because nobody was paying attention. And once a few people did pay attention, I was so, uh, yeah, appreciative of their attention. I wanted to make sure that for the most part they were getting what they wanted because I'm interested in all these crazy things. So it's not it's not binary. I can I can make episodes about all kinds of things. Now that I'm having more time, um, I've been getting a lot of work done. So there will be some things up this week. Plus, I'll do probably a live stream, you know, Friday before the fight. Do something quick and then do something after the fight, just to kind of touch base with everybody. Sometimes you just want to hit a bunch of different topics that have jumped out. So Brian Telford says nothing to do with Abdelaziz, but MMA needs the Ali Act. Yeah, I don't think it works with MMA because I don't know how you can tell the UFC that their belts, they don't get to own their own belts, and that they build up a star and all of a sudden Bellator can bid and promote them. It would need to be something a lot more involved than just the Ali Act. That's my sense. I think it either has to be a lot more or a lot less than what the Ali Act. I think the Ali Act, boxing was in such a bad state. It was so perverse and so corrupt that at the very least, the Ali Act gave the top 5%ers a shot at not being completely robbed blind. And so that is a good outcome. It needs to go a lot further, but you still have an awful lot of the old guard that, they want to continue being gatekeepers. So I don't know how you could really apply it. I don't know how you could really apply it to MMA. I think it would have to be changed fairly dramatically. But it does go back to what I was talking about earlier, that if the UFC doesn't get their poop in a group and start making the best fight the best, the main event for 249 should not be going on at all. Both Ferguson and Gaethje should be waiting until Khabib says he's ready to fight. You know, if that's how the UFC is going to do it, or strip Khabib. And they're unwilling to do either. So you're in a spot where it's not looking good for the UFC overall, and maybe it is threatening the Ali Act that is going to get the UFC back on track and being a little better with the way they shepherd the sport. Uh, Captain Picard says, gives £5 and says, stream once a week to keep us ticking over. Keep up the good work. Your insight is unrivaled. Thank you. I appreciate that. That's what I was thinking, especially once I'm up and going and I'm getting a couple episodes, actual episodes up a week. And then if I do a live stream after some of the big events, then it makes sense that I'm just doing like the Sunday live stream. And that's what I think I would want to do. So that makes sense. All right. Hardy versus Stevens. I'd have to know which Hardy and which Stevens you're talking about. Well, I think I know which Stevens you're talking about. But you can't mean Greg Hardy. Maybe you mean Dan Hardy. Well, breakdown, Brian Telford says a breakdown of the megalomania of Jon Jones, the depression and insecurity that defines a champion. Well, Jesus basically gave me the title and subtitle as well. Yeah, Jones is interesting. Now that nobody cares about drug cheats, apparently, in the UFC, and USADA and several of the commissions are just on board with cheating because, from a scientific perspective, the whole picogram, what did he call it? He called it not dribbling. Somebody's going to remember what he called it, where it supposedly leaked back out into the system. I can't remember the exact term that the Golden Snitch used. But that is so scientifically unsubstantiated, uh, that whole term, the whole idea that it could be trickling back into that John tested positive for something and it's staying in his body, but they don't. I talked to pulsing. Yeah, Grant Reed. Thank you. It's pulsing. There's there's no good scientific data on that. Not especially not in that specific case. And this is basically exactly what my wife does for part of her work. And I talked to her quite a bit, and I mean, she just laughed when I told her all the things. She says, "Yeah, you have to look for uh, the mechanism. He's talking about a thing, but there's no mechanism. Is he saying that it stays in the fat? Well, that you can test for. Is he saying it stays in the blood somehow? Well, that you can test for. Is it staying in the marrow, in the bone? That you can test for. But he's just saying there's this magic thing called pulsing, which cannot be demonstrated scientifically. And the major thing is USADA and UFC completely gave no mechanism to even suggest how it might be happening. So it's not a thing. It's just not a thing. Um, but nobody cares about that anymore. So USADA's not really a drug testing agency anymore. I believe they were, and maybe I'm wrong about that, but uh, they're not. So with Jon, I like him more now that I don't feel like I have to hammer him about the drugs because people in the media aren't scientifically literate. And I took it on myself to sort of go down that road a little bit with Jon and provide some sort of accountability. At least anybody who's interested, they could, you know, follow along and see that at least somebody was trying to hold him up to a standard. But we're not doing that anymore. So I'm not going to do, the horse is out of the barn. Nobody cares about whatever drugs people are doing. We're basically the UFC, and I'm not maligning the UFC. They're basically in the same spot that the NFL or Major League Baseball is in, and nobody's ever going to be in as good of a spot as the NBA. There's no way that there's not more PED use in the NBA than there is in all other sports. But nobody's ever been caught really. So UFC, and I did do an episode on this, talking about Jones and UFC uh, alliance with USADA and where it was going. And it's going where I thought it was going, and now it's just basically, the same as the other major sports, including the Olympics, because nobody cheats more than the Olympic stars, and you can just get away with it. Um, yeah, he says Jon is compartmentalized. I You may be right. I'm not sure because I've never dealt with him personally, so I don't know. For me to say somebody's something I'm very familiar with. Um, it's something that in the extreme, you have to know how the person is thinking, and I just don't have enough. I've virtually no intimate uh, information on Jon. I don't have any personal contact, so I can't tell you if he's compartmentalizing. I don't. I don't think he is necessarily. I don't think he is in the strictest sense. I think Jon is more. If you think of somebody who's compartmentalized as like a Japanese house that has all the rooms and all the sliding doors, and every space is divided and separated, versus a house, a modern house plan where everything is open. You can see from one end of the house to the other. I think Jon is more like the open house plan, and it's why his behavior is so seemingly random sometimes. Like he's spending way too much time in the rumpus room for sure, but he can because there's no walls between like his bedroom, the kitchen, and then boom, he's in the rumpus room with guns and hookers and whatever else, the flavor of the day. Homeless dudes. That I love that story. If Jon was a psychopath, he would not be talking to homeless guys. Wouldn't happen. There'd be no interest, no reason for him to do that. So I don't see. And Logan asks, Jon does have psychopathic tendencies, right? It can't really diagnose anybody, you know, in the public eye like that. Not effectively. We can make guesses at things. I don't find it helpful to think of him that way because when I start to think of somebody having one tendency or another, it's like I'm working a very strange jigsaw puzzle. And if I get something to fit, just because it fits, I don't keep it there. I fit it together and then I wait and see if that connection gives me more information. If it produces more information, especially if it allows you to then predict things, then that connection's more likely to be accurate. With Jon, one of the things that I keep coming back to is all the trouble Jon's ever gotten into, you've never seen him get into like a bar fight. And that's interesting because he's a fighter. And at one point, he was one of the most violent fighters, the way his style and his dynamic approach. And yet, you don't ever see Jon trying to be the man out in public. You see him, and he has a big, goofy grin on his face. I don't know, probably high, probably drunk, but he's like, ladies. But he also seems to get along with whatever guys are around. So to me, that's a guy who is not a guy. People who are compartmentalized typically are introspective to some degree, and maybe only about one thing in their life, but something causes them to separate parts of their life in a very dramatic way. Where with Jon, he seems to get in trouble almost any situation he's in. But the kind of trouble he gets into isn't like shooting off a gun, technically, I guess, would be a violent act, but the way Jon did it isn't truly him lashing out in a violent way. You don't hear him, getting into fights with yoga women at the gym like a Rumble Johnson or something. I quite honestly, I can't imagine any situation where any lady is going to make Jon mad. I think Jon just wants ladies to like him, even even if they're not that attractive. That's what I see with his behavior. So that's a very different beginning of a psychological profile of Jon than to think of him as a sociopath. He wants attention. He wants affection. Those aren't the things that a true psychopath, they can't even experience that. Um, I think where people believe Jon is socio or psychopathic is because he's so selfish, or he seems to be so selfish. Um, but that's a different. There's different reasons for that as well. Yeah, and Al Sorky cry so man, bad at that. Al Sukrai. Jon doesn't strike you as introspective. I think he is in his own weird way. Um, I think Jon. I think purely intellectually, Jon isn't that interested in just purely cerebral things. Not over the long haul. He's a physical guy. Um, you can see it in the way he fights, that he has such control and feel for his whole body. You get him in any situation. He's a horrible dancer. As he puts the kibosh on the idea that like black people all have rhythm. Like, Jon has no rhythm. He's a horrible dancer. Um, but he loves to dance, and I think it's because he physically feels it so intensely. So somehow his physicality and his mentality are really, there's a lot of connections there. Um, my pet theory about Jon, and I can't expand on the whole thing in this format, is that he suffers from middle child syndrome. And I see most of Jon's behaviors as being a result of abuse, and a complex abuse. I think he was horribly abused by his younger brother, particularly Chandler, and that his older brother went along with it to some degree because the older and youngest brother, similar, you can tell, and not just because they both became football players, but they are similar. And the alpha in that family is Chandler, and that's clear because he also wants to be. And Jon gets really submissive around his brothers, but particularly his younger brother. And he just goes out of his way to compliment Chandler. It's sycophantic. So I think he was physically abused horribly by his brothers. I think they teamed up on him, and Chandler was the ringleader once he got old enough. As a guess, I don't have enough family information to know that. I think what really makes it difficult is that the parents had to know some of it was going on, and they didn't do anything about it, particularly the mother. But the mother, she was a hard woman, from what I understand. She was the head of the family, and she was intellectually and spiritually, and I think physically, sort of the leader of the family. I think she's the one that handed out the whippings, and I think Jon was a little more sensitive than the other two boys, and it's not that uncommon in families sometimes where the parent, one or both of the parents will think, this boy needs to be hardened up. So I think that's what happened to him. And it's very confusing because you love your mother, and he clearly loves his mother, but if part of what I'm saying is correct, then she played a large role in allowing for his abuse. And maybe she also took part in it in her own way. We don't know. I don't know. I've resisted doing specific episodes on this because I haven't been able to get enough footage. If I could get, maybe some of you could send me some links. If you have some links of Jon interacting with his family, particularly before he got famous, say before he got into the UFC, that would be invaluable to me. And I'd be able to see if some of that stuff is there or it's not there. Yeah, Logan. Look at Logan. Media can make a buck using psychopathy. That's exactly right. Yeah, that's exactly right. And it's easy to kind of jump onto the filter of psychopathy, but there's a lot of tendencies and behaviors that could go in the psychopathy bucket, but also in a little more nuanced way can belong to other causes. And I tend to, the way I think about people and psychological profiles, I just assume somebody's not a psychopath. Because if they are, and you keep working on them, eventually you're not going to be able to deny it. It's monolithic. It's like a giant granite slab in the middle of a desert, a flat desert, and you have the giant granite slab sticking out of it. It's so pronounced and absolute, you you can't miss it over the long haul. So that's how I go about it when I think about sociopath or psychopathic tendencies. And David Strutt says, Jesus Christ, it's kind of scary to think Jon is a product of abuse and being the GOAT. Yeah, the more I looked into Jon, I became very sympathetic. I'm going to state now that's how I feel about Jon. If I ever got to the point where I was doing this on a level, like if I was at a level, say, I don't know, any of the usual gaggle, where I had a little bit of money to travel and had a platform and, even the advantage of having to be able to hire a couple people. It's one of the things I would try to do is connect with different fighters. Well, the first fighter I'd love to connect with would be Carlos Condit because I think he he's so goddamn sophisticated. I don't know anything about that guy. I don't know anything for sure about that guy. You look at his fights, you know everything. And yeah, he's End of his career, rough patch, whatever. I don't even care about that. He is one of the greatest badasses of all time. And I feel like his story has never been told because he's so reticent to give anything in an interview. And I just think, some of the experiences I've had, that if you can connect with somebody a little bit, and maybe it takes a week or a couple weeks, or you go visit somebody 3 or 4 times, but it's kind of amazing if you don't show up acting like a jackass, and if you don't have a list of questions, if you show up and just listen, that's to me the beginning of an interview. That's how you interview people, is you listen. You don't have a series of questions you snap off one after another. That you have to do for the radio, and there's all kinds of reasons people do it, and it's effective. But some of my heroes, I guess, in the world of documentary film, Earl Morris would be probably the biggest one. And that dude just gets people to say the craziest things because he will spend as much time as needed with somebody. And he's truly empathetic, super smart dude, and curious. So I would like to be able to do that. Say a year from now, if things really go well and I can put together something, the piece I'd like to add would be traveling and doing true documentary style interviews with people, which we've never seen. There have been a couple movies made. I just watched the Jens Pulver movie last night, and there were some good things about it. Not great filmmaking, but there were some good filmmaking aspects to it. But there's only a handful of examples of work like that. So I would love to be able to do that. Trendkill says, I remember that Condit Hardy fight. I wanted Hardy to win because I'm English, but he got starched good. Yeah, that was just both dudes saying it was a dick measuring contest, really. It's like, I'm going to punch you as hard as I can, and I'm not really going to try to stop you. You can punch me as hard as you want to, and I will take more than you can take. And when you see that kind of a thing where the guys actually have skill, there's something amazing about it. There's something beautiful and brutal and animalistic, but also extremely human and masculine. It's very, something very pure about it. You know, guys can't fight. Most people can't fight that way. So that was one of the great ones there. Okay, I know I've missed a bunch of questions, and we've gone 3 hours now, and I appreciate everybody sticking with me. Jesus, we got 144 people in here still. I appreciate that. I don't normally ask for subscriptions and that kind of stuff, but if you want to know what's going on and you want to support what's going on, go ahead and subscribe to my YouTube channel. I think hitting like and all that stuff is good. I know I've gotten into the habit of anytime I'm watching something, if I find it entertaining enough to watch it, I just hit like. What's most important to me is the interaction. So if I didn't get to your question during the live chat portion, I will go back through. I did that with the first one, and I'll do that again. Leave a comment on the video itself, because I'll just allow it to stay up as a video. So once it goes into that state, it'll be a couple hours after this ends. It'll be just a video. And go to the comment section under. Just put something there, and I'll be able to either get back at you in the comment section, or I'll take it up in the next bit of content that comes out. So hopefully everybody's ready for this week, fight week, and we get to see some good things in the lead up, and the fights end up being great, and everybody is healthy, and we have conversations instead of just dogmatic arguments, and hopefully everybody's taking care of themselves. If you are health compromised, don't take risks with yourself, or you live with somebody who's health compromised. My folks live 2,000 miles away from me, but they're both older, and particularly my mother has a respiratory issue where she has to be on an oxygen tank. Well, yeah, I've been instructing them from the beginning. Jesus, nothing, you can't get takeout or anything unless you go through all these extra steps. Because if my mother were to catch the coronavirus, she would be dead. There's zero doubt about that. So if you or loved one is in a situation like that, don't try to be a hero. But at the same time, you find yourself in a different position, you know, um, go out and live, and um, let's get things moving, and let's talk about things and see and make corrections if we do things wrong. Same thing with these events. If something isn't right, let's fix it. And any last questions? Oops. Sorry about that. Corey Beck says, we need less reporters and more body language experts. Yeah, well, I'm not a body language expert, but I am. It's something I can see. I can see some of that stuff, and it dovetails with some of the things I've learned about psychology. Strangely, but it wasn't something I wanted to do. The body language thing, it's a tool. Um, okay, Graham Reardon, nearly 3 a.m. over here. I'm still listening to the Newt. All right, brother, you're a true pal, as the rest of you are. And Graham's been around. He's an OG. He's been around a long time, and I appreciate everyone's support. And again, if you've got any ideas for episodes or what you'd like to see more of, um, over on the Twitters is a good place, and the comment section of this video once it turns into a video. I do see Blake Snodgrass. Sorry I wasn't active in this one. It's his birthday, so I've been a bit distracted with texts and such. So happy you're putting content out again. I'm excited to give this a proper listen later. Thanks, Blake. You're somebody I recognize, as I do most of you, especially the ones who haven't changed their icons recently. I have a good, I don't have a photographic memory, but I have a good visual memory. Trend Kill says, didn't get the notification for this. You missed the first 2.5 hours. Yeah, I'm sorry about that. I will be doing more live streams, and as I told everybody, I'll be doing a live stream after the fights, Saturday night, do a little bit, and then Sunday, 11 a.m. Western Pacific time, Pacific time, I'll be doing the Sunday live stream. And that I'm going to just do regular schedule. Anything else I add or subtract, it's just whatever we feel like. So hopefully everybody's doing well. Bulgaria, whew, yeah, 4:30 a.m. So sleep well or enjoy the rest of your evening, and let's get ready for fight week. And thanks everyone for joining in.